You were taught to keep moving up. Higher title, higher income, higher expectations. It feels like progress, but it also quietly increases your exposure to risk over time. The system rewards more, not enough. Every milestone resets the baseline and the target keeps moving. Over time, this creates a loop where satisfaction has a very short time horizon. It looks like you're advancing. Your income compounds, your lifestyle adjusts, and your commitments expand. But the volatility of your life also increases in ways that are harder to see. But there is a question most people avoid. If your income stopped today, how long could your system hold? That is not about success, it is about drawdown tolerance. This video is not about growing faster, it is about building something that survives longer. Because long-term stability is not built on speed, but on the ability to sustain. From the beginning, the direction felt obvious. You were told to keep moving upward over time. Growth became the default expectation. Faster progress was always seen as better. Higher outcomes felt like the only signal of success. More became the metric that shaped your decisions. There is nothing inherently wrong with growth, but the model you were given was incomplete. One critical variable was quietly missing. No one explained how to sustain progress over a long time horizon. Stability was rarely part of the conversation, and rhythm was never defined. The system rewards acceleration above all else. Very few talk about endurance or volatility management. Keeping the system alive is rarely the goal. Without stability, growth becomes harder to maintain. The drawdown periods feel longer and heavier. Compounding starts to lose its consistency. As you climb higher, the pressure compounds. The margin for error becomes smaller over time. Risk exposure quietly increases without notice. This part is rarely visible in the narrative. Growth without sustainability increases fragility over the long term. And fragile systems eventually break under pressure. Look at this pattern closely. You grow a little, then you stabilize. That pause is part of the system working. Then you move again, and once again, you stabilize. This rhythm reduces volatility over time. But most people do not live like this. They keep pushing upward without pause. The system never gets time to adjust. There is no time to adapt, no room to strengthen the base, no buffer for unexpected drawdown. Eventually, the system starts to tighten. It looks structured, but it holds tension. Not strength, just pressure. From the outside, it still looks like progress. But internally, energy is draining. The system becomes fragile to volatility. This is not about personal weakness. It is a flawed rhythm design. The time horizon was never considered properly. You were trained to move fast, not to sustain over the long term, and that changes everything. Growth is easy to notice. It shows up in numbers, titles, and visible progress. It feels like movement because everything looks measurable. Sustainability is harder to see. It does not show up as quickly or as clearly. It works quietly in the background over a longer time horizon. No one rewards stability. There is no applause for avoiding risk or managing volatility. Attention goes to whatever is growing faster. Over time, this shapes how we think. We start to see stillness as failure, even when it reduces risk and protects from drawdown. But stability can be healthy. Pausing growth can give systems time to strengthen. It allows compounding to work without added pressure. Because it is invisible, people avoid it. It does not feel productive in the short term, so it is often labeled as falling behind. So people keep pushing for growth. They increase exposure without adjusting their system. The risk builds quietly under the surface. The problem is not the fall. The problem starts when the climb is too fast. Without structure, every gain increases potential drawdown. Sustain does not mean staying still. It does not mean you stop improving. It means you are protecting what already works. It is about protecting your rhythm over time. It is about managing your energy so it does not collapse. It is about maintaining a structure that can last. The goal is to keep the system running, not just pushing for short bursts of growth, but avoiding a painful drawdown after. Growth is often visible and celebrated, but staying at the top is much harder, especially without breaking under pressure. This requires something different than effort. It is not just about working harder. It is about awareness of limits. Awareness means knowing when to slow down. It means resisting constant acceleration. It means giving space for recovery and compounding. But this mindset goes against the system. Everything around you rewards speed and volume. The pressure to go faster never stops. So if you feel like you are falling behind, you might not actually be failing. You might just be stabilizing your position. Most people don't fail because they lack growth. They fail because they can't sustain what they built. The real risk is not rising, but maintaining over time. They move up too fast without a stable system. There is no buffer, no margin for volatility, and no structure to absorb pressure. When pressure arrives, everything feels heavier. Small problems start compounding into larger ones. Volatility becomes harder to manage. It is not always about effort or discipline. Sometimes the system simply cannot handle the load, and drawdown becomes inevitable. Growth creates new expectations and responsibilities. Your time horizon shifts without you noticing. What worked before may not scale anymore. Without sustain, those demands turn into pressure. Instead of progress, it feels like constant strain. Compounding works both ways. Eventually, people feel stuck and confused. They think progress has stopped, but often it is just exhaustion. This is not stagnation, it is overload. Growth without control increases hidden risk, and eventually leads to instability. You don't need to stop wanting more. The real shift is how you define progress. Growth without context can quietly increase your risk. Growth feels like the destination, but it is only one phase in a longer time horizon. Systems fail when one phase is treated as everything. What matters more is continuity. Can your life keep running without constant pressure? Or does every step depend on pushing harder? Stability requires balance, not between effort and rest alone, but between upward movement and structural support. Ambition is not the problem. Capacity is often ignored. When they mismatch, volatility increases over time. This approach does not look impressive. It rarely gets attention or validation, but it reduces long-term drawdown. Over a long enough time horizon, survival compounds. Small stability beats repeated recovery cycles. Consistency quietly outperforms intensity. The fastest is not always the one who wins. The one who avoids collapse usually does. Stability is an underrated advantage. The modern system is designed to reward constant growth. It pushes you to move faster, earn more, and keep scaling. Stability is rarely part of the visible incentive structure, but you still have a choice in how you respond. You can fully follow that pace without questioning it, or you can step back and adjust your own rhythm. Adjusting does not mean you are falling behind. It means you are aware of your limits and capacity. That awareness reduces unnecessary volatility in your life, because growth without support creates hidden risk. You may reach a higher level, but it becomes harder to stay there. Sustainability is what protects your position over time. Without that stability, everything starts to feel temporary. Progress looks real, but it does not last. The time horizon becomes shorter than you expect. You move up quickly, then face a sudden drop. Then you rebuild and repeat the same cycle again. This pattern creates long-term inefficiency. Over time, that cycle becomes exhausting. Not because you are weak, but because the system lacks balance. Many people stay in it without realizing the cost. Eventually, you pause and question what is happening. You start to see the instability more clearly, and that is where real awareness begins. You are not wrong for wanting growth. It is a natural response to rising costs and expectations, but you are only taught one side of the system. Staying stable is not luck. It is a skill built over time through awareness and constraint. And like any skill, it compounds quietly in the long term. Once you see this clearly, your decisions start to shift. You begin to think in terms of time horizon, not quick wins. Growth becomes something you manage, not chase. You stop forcing outcomes that increase volatility. You allow space for adjustment and recovery. And that is what reduces long-term drawdown. If you want to understand this system deeper, we will continue step by step. No noise, no shortcuts, just clear thinking. Because clarity is the real advantage over time.